be any technical difficulties today, please do bear with us. To make sure that you get the most out of the event, we ask that you set your screen to speaker view so that you'll see the main person that's speaking at the time. Please make sure that you stay muted to ensure good sound quality for everyone here on the call today. And should you require closed captioning, you'll be able to click at the bottom of your screen to enable this. Unfortunately, this will only work from a laptop, not on a tablet. Please ensure that you use the chat function should you have any technical difficulties, and someone will be able to hopefully assist you with that. And should you have any questions for any of the speakers on the call today or about the theme in general, then please do add those to the chat as well, and we'll follow up with you after the event. So just to remind you all to make sure that you are on speaker view so that you can see the main person who's speaking, and that you bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. But we have a lot of people joining now, and so hopefully we'll be able to begin in a moment. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the theme launch for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022. Each year, on the 27th of January, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp, we come together to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. On this day, we remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust, alongside the millions of other people killed under Nazi persecution and in the genocides that followed in Rwanda, Cambodia, Bosnia, and Darfur. Each year, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust chooses a different theme for the day. This enables our audiences to learn something new about the past and makes it easier for activity organisers to create fresh and engaging activities. Every theme is relevant to the Holocaust, to Nazi persecution, and to each subsequent genocide, and has the life stories of those who were murdered and those who survived at its heart. Today, we are proud to launch the theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022. Joining us, we have the Chief Executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, Olivia Marks-Waldman, OBE, the Head of Research, Dr. Rachel Sentry, Holocaust survivor, Dr. Martin Stern, and survivor of the genocide in Rwanda, Alfonsin Cabagabo. Together, along with the hundreds of people on this call today, we're going to explore the theme and highlight some of the exciting ways it offers all of us to explore Holocaust Memorial Day. So first of all, and without further ado, I'd like to invite our Chief Executive, Olivia, to announce and to officially launch the theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022.
Thank you very much, Barnabas. It's lovely to see so many people, albeit on the screen, and to see so many familiar faces and names. For those who haven't met Barnabas before, Barnabas has been a youth champion with the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and now is part of our youth representative panel, helping us a bit more behind the scenes usually, helping and advising us. Some of you may have seen him in front of the screen at past events and in January through some of the amazing events he organised at the University of Oxford that reached hundreds of people for Holocaust Memorial Day 2021. So before I talk about Holocaust Memorial Day 2022, I just want to reflect for a couple of minutes on Holocaust Memorial Day this year in January, which was unlike any other Holocaust Memorial Day. We had chosen the theme, Be the Light in the Darkness. When we chose it, we thought of the darkness of the Holocaust and of recent genocides, and of darkness around us today, the distortion of the Holocaust that happens, distortion and denial of other genocides too, and the darkness of events around the world where people are discriminated and persecuted because of their identity. What we did not anticipate was the darkness of the pandemic that left so many people isolated, and the darkness when that pandemic was deliberately exploited to foster division. But we weren't just asking people to take action to make a better future. We were asking people to be the kind of people who bring light. Be the light in the darkness and bring light to your communities. And despite the pandemic and despite the isolation, thousands of people did, hundreds of thousands of people engaged with Holocaust Memorial Day in January this year. More than 2,800 separate organizations right across the country organized and delivered more than 3,500 activities, despite the pressures on local community organizations, staff on furlough, the pressures on frontline services. So many of the organizations that mark HMD were organizations that were delivering and supporting people who were vulnerable in the pandemic. But despite those pressures, people wanted to use Holocaust Memorial Day as an opportunity to stand in solidarity with others, to connect with other people in their neighborhoods, within their communities, whether that was communities of interest or geographical neighborhoods. One of my neighbors told us that, that he had taken his boys for a walk down our street to show them the lights shining out of almost every window as the nation joined together to light the darkness in a very tangible and physical way. And not just to show them the candles, but to talk to the boys what they represented, that people were shining a light to remember and honor people who were murdered in the Holocaust and under Nazi persecution and in more recent genocides. And they were shining a light to stand in solidarity today with people who are subject to persecution and hostility because of who they are. So as we reflect on Holocaust Memorial Day 2021, we are now moving forward to think about Holocaust Memorial Day 2022. And of course, Holocaust Memorial Day itself is one day when we join together, whether it's digitally online as we are today, or whether it is in communities when we are able to do so. It's one day when we learn more about the past. It's one day where we empathize more with other people. We try and understand the impact that the Holocaust and recent genocides have had on individuals. And we try and show empathy to people, particularly people who are different from us, from different communities. We try and learn more about those and show that empathy. And it's one day where we take action to improve society around us, to improve our neighborhoods, and to do what we can to make a better future, because we have learnt what has happened in the past. So perhaps it's not surprising that our theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022 is one day. And I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Rachel Century, who can tell us a little bit more about what this theme can help us accomplish. Rachel, thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. So the words one day are familiar to all of us. We probably use these rather ordinary words at least once a day. One day, I hope we will all meet in person. The weekend is just one day away. Or perhaps something I've been saying a little bit at the moment, things are a little bit difficult for me. I'm going to take things one day at a time. But for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022, we're asking all of you to consider these words in an extraordinary, unfamiliar context, the context of the Holocaust and of genocide. There are many different ways to explore this theme, and I'm just going to share a few ideas with you today. There are many more ideas on our theme paper, which you'll be able to read online after this launch, and you can, of course, come up with your own interpretations. So as Olivia said, Holocaust Memorial Day itself is one day, the 27th of January, that we put aside to come together, to remember, to learn about the Holocaust, Nazi persecution, and the genocides that followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur, in the hope that there may be one day in the future with no genocide. We learn more about the past, we empathise with others today, and we take action for a better future. Survivors of the Holocaust and of genocide often talk about the one day when everything changed, sometimes for the worse and sometimes for the better. Ibi Nil, who survived the Holocaust, feels that from one day to the next, everything changed, and yet nothing had changed. He says, "One day, Gretel, my school friend, greeted me with an embrace. The next day, she ran across the road and turned her head away so as not to acknowledge me." In April 1975, the Khmer Rouge entered the Cambodian capital, bringing in 5 years of terror. One day, Sok Pao Din was having breakfast with his family when somebody knocked on the door, a Pol Pot soldier who pointed his gun and said, "You've got to get out of your house right now or we shoot you." For Faiza, a lawyer and mother living in Sudan, there was a defining one day. Following a civil war in 2003, which has left millions of people displaced, the Sudanese government has supported Arab militia who have destroyed hundreds of villages and murdered thousands of people. Faiza was targeted by the Sudanese government for supporting victims of the genocide. And so, she says, "One day, I decided to leave my country. It was a hard decision, but there was no other way. I left my home, my friends, my people. I left all my belongings. There is a book. There is a book on the table near my..." Oh, I'm sorry if I'm muted. I keep getting a message that I've been muted. I apologize for the interference. I'll just start Faiza's quote again because it's such a powerful quote. "One day, I decided to leave my country. It was a hard decision, but there was no other way. I left my home, my friends, my people. I left all my belongings. There is a book on a table near my bed, open to page 49, waiting for me." At your HMD event, you could pick one day in history and learn about that day. For example, 12th of July, 1995. Against the backdrop of a war, after Bosnia had declared independence from Yugoslavia, Bosnian Serb troops descended on the town of Srebrenica. They began separating Bosniak men from women and children, despite the area having been designated by the UN as a safe area. Over the next couple of days, more than 8,000 Muslim men and boys were murdered in and around Srebrenica. The 12th of July, 1995 was the last day that many women saw their husbands, fathers, sons, and brothers. It may be hard to pick out just one day. The genocide in Rwanda lasted 100 days, beginning after the plane carrying the president was shot down on the 6th of April, 1994. The genocide followed decades of tensions between Hutus and Tutsis. Beata Uwazanika recalls how, having watched her fellow Tutsis around her being murdered, and on many occasions thinking she was going to be murdered, every one of those 100 days was dangerous. Of course, one day is a snapshot in time and cannot give the full picture. For those who suffered for days, for weeks, for months, and even for years, focusing on just one day is a starting point, a way in for us to learn more about what happened during their experiences. And today we're going to hear from two survivors about their experiences on one day. I'd like to pass back to Barnabas to introduce our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll now hear from Dr. Martin Stern. Martin is a Holocaust survivor. He was born in 1938 and he lived in Holland. He survived camps at both Westerbork and Theresienstadt. Today, Martin shares his life story widely across the UK to make sure that we learn from genocide for a better future. He works especially closely with young people and it's been an absolute pleasure to get to know him over the past few years. Martin will now share his one day.
Thank you. One day in 1944, in the spring, I was in a little school at the age of 5, near the center of Amsterdam. The form teacher had taken my class into the little school hall. It was a converted house. Things were pretty simple and small. She was on a chair behind a table on the little stage in the hall. And she had told my classmates and I to line up against one of the side walls, ready, I think, to play some game or do some exercises. When the door at the back of the hall opened, 2 young men, 18-ish, I would think, walked in, ordinary clothes, raincoats. And one of them said, "Is Martin Stern here?" And the teacher immediately replied, "No, he hasn't come in today." And there I was in the middle of the row of my classmates. And aged 5, I didn't understand what was going on. So I put my hand up and I said, "But I have come in." And as these 2 young men were leading me out of the back of that little hall, I looked round, and I will never forget the ashen face of the teacher. They took me outside onto the street. It was a grey, drizzly day. They had their bikes against a lamppost, and they put me on the back of one of their bikes, the way people do in Holland, and cycled, the 2 of them, with me on the back of one of their bikes, through Amsterdam, quite some distance, talking with me all the way, perfectly ordinary conversation, in absolutely perfect, flawless Dutch. It would be very unusual for somebody who was German to speak Dutch with such a clearly perfect accent. These were not Germans, they were Dutchmen. We arrived at a big red brick building. I was marched into it, up the stairs to the first floor, and made to wait outside a door, guarded. I was guarded by a man. And when the door opened, I was led into a large office with just one big desk in the middle. And behind the desk sat a man in a green military-style uniform who started asking me questions. By this stage, I'd got some questions. When can I go back to school? When can I go home? And the man sat back a bit in his chair and half raised his arms and said he had his orders. That was not part of his job to answer those questions. His job was to find out that he'd caught the little boy he wanted. It was almost as if he wanted me, a 5-year-old, on the other side of his big desk, to be sorry for him. And I reckon he knew exactly what he was taking part in. The building's a school. It still was a school. It's still there. It's still a school. It had been taken over by the secret police arm of the SS, the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD. They wore those green uniforms. And in Western occupied Europe, they had, amongst other things, the task of rounding up and deporting Jews. And in Central and Eastern Europe, they were murdering them too, on an industrial scale. As soon as he was satisfied he'd caught the right little boy, he ordered a man who'd been waiting by the door to take me out. So I was led into a school corridor, doors off each side, and just one of them was open. And through that door, I saw a classroom, a map on the far wall, and standing there, one man looking at the map with his back to me. the man whom I'd been living with for 2 years, he and his wife, near the center of Amsterdam, practically round the corner from where Anne Frank was hidden. I didn't know that, but very close to Anne Frank. I called out to him and I wanted to run up to him and ask him what was happening, but I was dragged away. That's what they wanted. They wanted me, a 5-year-old, to betray the fact that I knew him so well that he would not be able to deny that he and his wife had been protecting for 2 years the little son of a Jew. That day, everything changed. Those events led to his death in a horrific concentration camp near Hamburg in Germany, Neuengamme. And I was transported to Westerbork prison camp in the Netherlands, and from there with my 1-year-old sister to a town in what's now the Czech Republic, which the Nazis used for a deception operation. They pretended that Jews were living under fairly reasonable conditions and were doing forced labor, when the reality was that people were taken away about 1,000 at a time on trains from there to their deaths in places like Auschwitz. But in the meantime, they were used for deception, to deceive the Red Cross and to deceive the outside world. There we were taken under the wing of a woman prisoner, a Dutch woman from Amsterdam, who wanted to look after some children. When eventually a train took the last children from that town, in German Theresienstadt, to Auschwitz, where they were killed, we were there waiting to board the train. But our names were not called. And I guess it was because this woman had taken us from amongst the other children and was looking after us in women's dormitories. And so the German administrative machine slipped a cog, and my sister and I survived. That's how one day can change one's fate, from being looked after by a wonderful couple who were the most wonderful substitute parents, to a situation where life and death depends on things that happen from day to day, and each day something could happen that means you would die. But I also think of one day in the future. An enormous amount of study has been done of the Holocaust and other genocides, and we know the perpetrators are not madmen. They are, in the words of one author who used them as the title, part of the title of his book, ordinary men. But they become monsters. And to reach that one day when we no longer have genocide, the human race, you and me and other people, need to understand ourselves a lot better than we currently do, so that so many people can be the light in the darkness, that we no longer have genocide. Unimaginable? I don't think so. There was a time in the past, if you go back 2,000, 3,000 years, in the place where you are now, when arguing that one day there would be no cannibalism would lead to you being laughed at. It was normal. Human sacrifice and all sorts of other cruelties. That's unimaginable to us in the past. Just as that has disappeared, the human race has shown signs of improvement over the centuries and over the millennia. We no longer hang people in public. We no longer routinely torture people. We abolished capital punishment, even for murder, in this country. We have become gradually less violent. But the job isn't finished. Every day we read and see horrible things about what is happening in Syria, in Ethiopia, and in many other parts of the world. Christians are now worldwide a persecuted group in very many countries, and so are other minority religions. There is a tremendous amount of work to do. But one day, enough of us will have learnt the necessary lessons, but it means we need to understand ourselves and the perpetrators who start out as ordinary men. One day, enough people will be the light in the darkness.
Thank you, Martin. It's always absolutely astonishing and incredibly moving to hear you speak, not only because of your incredible story and that really moving one day when you left that school, but also because of everything that you've done since the war and all the work and study and knowledge that you've accrued since then. Is always a pleasure to speak to. I'm now pleased to introduce Alfonsin Cabagabo, a survivor of the genocide in Rwanda. Alfonsin came from a Tutsi family of 14 children, but at the time of the genocide, only in 1994, only 2 of them still lived in Rwanda. The rest of her siblings lived in exile because of the persecution that they had faced for many years. Alfonsin and her family survived the genocide. Today, Alfonsin is Vice Chair of Survivors Fund, an organisation that is committed to rebuilding the lives of survivors of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And Alfonsin will now share her one day.
Thank you, Barnabas. And not very easy to follow Martin, but I am very pleased to share the story of one day that completely changed my life, the life of my family. That one day is on the 13th of April, 1994, 7 days after the genocide started. Before I talk how that one day completely changed my life, let me just briefly tell you what happened before. As you mentioned, the genocide in Rwanda started on the 7th of April after the president was killed. And on the 7th of April, when we heard in the morning, we wake up, we heard that the president of Rwanda has been killed, we knew, myself and my family, we knew that it was the end for us. So I was actually with my dad, my mom. I have a baby who was 6 months old, my sister who had 2 children, few other relatives. We were all hiding in my dad's house because he had a bigger house and we thought we'd be safe there. And when we knew the president was killed, we say, we can't even stay in the house. What do we do? We decided to go to hide in a small house in the country, in the garden of my dad, thinking they will not find us. But only a few hours on that day, on the 7th, the militia and the soldier, they came to our house. They found us in that small house. And my dad gave them whatever he could, money, radio, everything, to say, please do not kill my children. So there were maybe 5 of them. They left without killing us. An hour later, another group came, and my dad begged them again. And luckily, he had some dollars that he has received from I don't know where, and he gave to one soldier. I said, can you take my children to the Catholic church? And the Catholic church was only 5 minutes away from our house. But getting there was like, like crossing an ocean, because this soldier who received money from my dad took us, but really we had to run without anything. We left everything, just ourselves. And when we arrived in the church, there were so many people already, full of people. Some were already injured, some were dying. But we thought we were safe because in the past, there were many killing of Tutsi. In 73, in 63, each time people were able to reach a Catholic church, in the past, they were safe. But this time, hiding in the church was not enough, because so many people were killed in that church. But the miracle that happened, because I was a teacher in the school that was attached to the church, I talked to the director of the school, who was a priest, and say, can we go and leave the church, because there's so many people and the babies are hungry, they're crying. Can I and my sister, because I'm a teacher, go and hide in another room in the school, in one of the houses of the teachers? And he agreed. So I left quickly with my baby, my sister who had 2 children who were also very young, to hide in that small house who belonged to, it was an accommodation for one of the teachers. So we were quite a lot of us in a small house of 2 rooms, but we were probably 20 people. When we left the church, just when we left, an hour later, the militia, the Interahamwe, as we call them, and the soldier, they came to kill people in the church. Machetes, grenades, I can't tell. So when we were in that small room, we could hear people shouting. So my sister and myself, we started crying because we thought my dad and my mom died in that church. But luckily, in that evening, my dad came to the house. The priest has managed to save him and hide him somewhere else. So he brought him to stay with us and one of my nephews. So it was a miracle to see them. So we are there for crying, my sister and I, the children crying, because we thought my mom was dead. We did not see her. The priest couldn't tell us where she was. And we stayed there for 6 days. But what happened? It's that one day. Believe me, on the 13th of April, the priest, director of the school, came to call me and say, someone wants to see you. I panicked. And my dad said, you can't go. I said, no, Dad, let me go. And the priest said, don't worry, come with me. So when I left the small house, went with the priest, I saw my brother-in-law. I had a brother-in-law called Guy, who was a Belgian soldier. He has managed to negotiate to come with other Belgian soldiers who were sent to Rwanda to only save the expatriates. They were not allowed to rescue Rwandese people. But because he knew we were hiding in the church, he came and asked the priest, do you have the Cabagabo family here? And the priest came to call me. So when I saw him, it's like seeing God. It's like the heaven was opening because we just were waiting to die. So when I saw him, that's one day we never forget. So he told me, run, call your dad, take your baby and come. So I ran back to the small house, asked my dad to come. My sister followed. And when we went, he put us into a military tank with other Belgian soldiers. But that one day, we saw my mom. We thought she was dead. But the priest has managed to hide her in another place. Because when they killed people in the church, she was in her late 70s. She fell on the floor, a lot of bodies on top of her, and the priest has managed to rescue her. So getting in that military tank and showing my mom, not only on the 13th, the brother-in-law, I always thank my sister who was married to him, the best thing she has done in her life. Seeing my mom alive. How can I forget that one day? He took us from that, we were 9 of us. My sister had 2 children, my dad, my mom, another nephew, another niece, with a lot of other Belgian soldiers, from the church where we were hiding to the airport. They were shooting, really, they had to be fighting with the militia to get us to the airport. And when we got there, there was a plane waiting to rescue Belgian, French, all the expatriates. And ourselves and few other Rwandese people were allowed to board that plane and to go to Kenya. And from Kenya, to be brought to Belgium to safety. We arrived probably in Belgium like on the 15th or the 16th, but it's a day we never forget. Not only because of that miracle to me and my family, but because it's a day where also I felt so sad. I left other people who were hiding with us. Luckily, in that small house, they survived, but other people in the church were killed. So I asked myself, why these Belgian soldiers and French couldn't rescue all those people. Why the United Nations, the peacekeepers who were there, were just looking, not allowed to protect us. So a day of surviving, but a day, I felt guilty for so many years. I never talked about my story for years because I felt guilty to survive when other people couldn't. Not only to survive, but survive with my family, my baby, my dad, my mom, when so many people around us. We lived in an area where there were so many Tutsi. We were the only family who survived, all of us. Just a miracle. So that day, it's a day I will never, never forget. Because it changed my life. I left Rwanda, went to become a refugee in Belgium. But because of that, it changed my life also because I became an advocate for peace. I started working with young people. I worked for the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, and one of my focus was peace building, getting young people to be agents of peace in Burundi, Rwanda, Congo, even if we still have conflict. So I dedicated my life to do that, but also to speak out now. When, after a few years, when I went over my guiltiness, I started speaking out in events. The Holocaust Memorial, that's not my first time, but also other events. Soon we will be commemorating the 27 years of the Rwanda genocide. I will be speaking again about how, yes, I was lucky, but how important of educating our children still in schools, in families, to grow up understanding the importance of love, respecting each other, understanding how important that we are all human beings. How can we do that? In a way, one day, hopefully, there will be no more genocide. One day, hopefully, peace will win. One day, love will win. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfonsin. What a wonderful vision of hope you give us all. Now, one of the things that actually struck me whilst I was listening to both you and Martin just now was that you both mentioned a call for action, a look towards the future. And I find this incredibly powerful because for me, one day actually represents a challenge. It represents a challenge to us to work towards a day without genocide, without racism, and without hatred. Now, we may never reach that day, reminded as we are by the almost constant news of atrocities, of identity-based hatred, and sadly in places like Darfur in southern Sudan, ongoing genocide. But we look forward nonetheless. We look forward to a day when there aren't, as there were last year, 1,668 anti-Semitic incidents here in the UK, but to the day when there are none. We're a very long way from that day, and indeed it might never come. But there's so much more that we can do to make this day and the next and the one after that a better place for everyone. This is what we see on Holocaust Memorial Day. Communities coming together in solemn remembrance and in profound determination that the past, never forgotten, will act as a warning for the future. Holocaust Memorial Day may be one day, but the lessons we hear and the testimonies that we hear on that day are the ones that we can and indeed must remember and live through our own lives each and every day. Because there will also come a day when there are no longer first-hand witnesses to the horrors of the Holocaust and of genocide. As a young person, I've had the privilege of meeting survivors and hearing them share their testimony, just as we've done so today with Martin and Alfonsin. It's an inspiring privilege, but it's also a humbling one, knowing, as I do, that I'm part of one of the last generations to hear them speak. Because of this, I'm reminded of my duty, in fact of all our duties, to listen to their testimonies, to remember them, and to learn from them. It is us, young people in particular, but also everyone who comes and joins us on Holocaust Memorial Day. It's us who will carry the never-ending torch of their memory, your memory, into the future. It's us who will stand as your witnesses. It's us who will be the vanguard of that one day in the future when no one will live in fear. And it's with all of this that I pledge today to you, Martin, to you, Alfonsin, to all the survivors that I've had the honor of meeting, and to all the victims that I never could, that we will always remember your lives, your experiences, your families, and your cultures. In us, your memory will never be forgotten. So as we come together here today to think about Holocaust Memorial Day 2022, the activities that we will organise, the people that we will speak to, and the stories that we will tell, I hope that we will all remember that that one day, the 27th of January, represents a challenge to us all, a challenge to remember the days of the past, to act in the days of the present, and to work towards the days of the future. And now, to close this evening's theme launch, I'd like to invite the Chair of Trustees for the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, Laura Marks, OBE, to say a few words.
Well, thank you, Barnabas. And I really don't feel there's much more for me to say after hearing your testimonies and actually also your analysis of it, Barnabas, which was so thoughtful and so moving and so personal. My job this evening is just really to thank you all so much for coming. Let me start off by thanking our speakers. I mean, however many times, I think as Barnabas said, however many times you hear the stories of the survivors, we hear Martin's story, we hear Alfonsin's story. And today, by them focusing on one day, that one day as a little boy, Martin was taken from school, that day has become real for me. The story has been crystallized in that one day, that moment of being taken away and life changing forever. And Alfonsin, that day when you realized, you said the day you realized you would be a peacemaker. I mean, thank you for sharing that moment with us, that moment that changed your life. We hope you can see how that focus on one day where something really massive, something life-changing, genuinely life-changing happened for survivors of genocide, how that will enable us to build really powerful, meaningful events for thousands and thousands of people come next Holocaust Memorial Day. I want to thank all of the MPs, peers, the survivors, many, many survivors here. Thank you for coming along and putting yourselves through this again and again to be part of today and to help us to think about how we continue with the messaging. Community workers, and thank you all the event organizers who are here. We know that actually we depend entirely on you for Holocaust Memorial Day. You know, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust is a small group of people. You know, we can help, we can facilitate, we can provide materials, but ultimately it's down to you as local event organizers to make this happen. Thank you for joining us today. Let me thank also so many of the Holocaust Memorial Day trustees who are here today. There may be others who I've missed, but I saw Tulip, Lee, Hannah, Michael, and Ruth, all of whom are volunteers and give their time to ensure this organization functions. Thank Lord Pickles, who's here, who's our Vice President, and Lord Dubbs and Sally Seeley from the MHCLG. To thank the staff of HMDT who are here, who really made things happen today. Rebecca for doing the logistics, to Rachel for speaking so beautifully, for Asal, to Olivia, and to other members of staff who are here, just making sure that this all actually happens so beautifully. Barnabas, yes, you said we all can do something. We can make sure that on Holocaust Memorial Day and throughout the year, we keep the memory alive. We remind people about what happened and how life so easily, small things can develop into bigger things. And before you know it, things become awful. And from hearing the stories of what happened to the people where it became awful, both on Holocaust Memorial Day and throughout the year, we keep that alive and we make sure that we learn from genocide for a better future. I just want to end with something that Barnabas said. Well, actually something Barnabas said and something Alfonsin said. Alfonsin said, "One day love will win." Well, thank you, Alfonsin. What a wonderful thought to leave us with. And finally with Barnabas, who said, as a young person who has had no personal connection with genocide, thank goodness, and may that remain the case forever. Barnabas said, in your memory, in us, your memory will never be forgotten. And I commit to that myself too. It will never be forgotten. And I thank you all for coming, and I thank you all for taking away our theme and for using it to start to plan now for Holocaust Memorial Day. It's round the corner. And thank you so much for being with us this evening. And I think I'm the person who clicks the goodbye button. So thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.